Alright, we're going to install Linux alongside this edition of Windows, so we're just going to do a right click on the menu button and go to the disk management. Down the bottom we have it's only an 8GB flash drive, so the sizes are not to scale in any way. Up here, this is the disk 0, is the system drive, so it's got a system reserved partition at the start of 500 megabytes. The C drive is 200 gigabytes, and we've got a recovery partition at the end, which is it's 460 megabytes. So we've got two 500 megabyte partitions and one 200 gigabyte partition. We're going to restart the computer in a moment, and I'll boot off the USB drive with Linux Mint 19.2 on it, and we're going to install Linux Mint alongside Windows, and we're going to give Windows about, say, 40 gigabytes, somewhere there. And then we'll create another partition in the middle to share the files, and then we'll put Linux up the end. Or you could do it the other way, you could put Windows, Linux, and then the free space. It doesn't really matter. The reason we're going to do this is because if you're in Windows and you've left for example, a video file on your Linux system, you can't actually get to your Linux system from Windows because Windows cannot actually read the Linux file system. Restart and we'll go and have a look, and it'll all make sense once we get there. And we're rebooting now. See the Linux Mint logo. We'll just let the automatic timer count down. This is the live Linux desktop. It's called the live because it's running off the USB drive. You can see it's got the install Linux Mint icon on it there. At this stage, no changes have been made to the computer, so we could shut down now if we wanted to, pull the USB or the DVD out and restart the computer, and you wouldn't know any difference. So we'll begin the installer. Show you into it a little bit. Continue again. These are just choices for your language and so forth. Continue past that. I normally select that, but I'm going to leave it for now. And this is the first screen where we have to consider our choices. We can see up the top here it says the computer currently has Windows 10 on it. What would you like to do? And then the choice it's defaulting to is the top one here, install Linux Mint alongside Windows 10. And that is what we're going to do. We could, if we wanted to, we could hit continue. This section in the center here represents the hard drive. And at this stage, the Linux installer is suggesting put Linux over here on 93 gigs and leave Windows over here. We can see it's Windows because it's got NTFS as the file system. Over here is ext4, so that's usually what a Linux system is. We can put the mouse in the middle and we can drag left and right, and we can give Windows less or Linux more, whichever way we want to go there, depending on how much space you think you want for either system. And then we hit install now and we give it our details and so forth, and in 10 minutes we're all done. However, we're going to look at some different options. This is the easiest way. If you don't want to look at the other options, yeah, just set that up the way you want it, depending on how much space you think you want either way. You can only go so far, so you can see Windows is actually using about 30 gigs, but I certainly wouldn't go that tight on it. You'd want to leave it at, say, at least 10 gigabytes or something. And the same thing the other way. Linux is going to want about 10, 12, something there. You can't even read it, but again, I wouldn't go that tight with it. You want at least about 30 for Linux. So we'll just quit out of here, and we're going to start the partitioning tool, which is called gparted. And if we open the menu and press GP, it normally comes up. There it is. And this is to edit the hard drive or to make changes to the hard drive, to the partitions on them. We'll let it have a look at the drives, and they should pop up here on the screen in a moment. There they are. And we can see NTFS down here, and a little bit of couple of megabytes. That's that grey area right at the end, just 2 megabytes, so I'm not going to worry about that. So we know this is the reserved partition at the start that was 500 megabytes, and there it is. And this one at the end was the recovery partition, and again, see that's 460 megabytes. And here's our 200 gigabyte C drive, as Windows calls it. Linux is calling it SDA2, but this is the one that's concerning us at the moment. Now, from that other screen we're on a few moments ago, where we can drag left and right with the mouse, basically what that's doing is saying, do you want it over here or do you want it over here? So if I go, we click on it and I hit partition, I go resize move, and same thing now, I've got this, bring the mouse over to the right hand side, double headed arrow turns up, and I can move that down. So we'll go down to about 40 gigabytes. So the yellow represents the amount of space that's actually being used on the drive. And so if we go as little as we can, you can actually move it. I don't know whether it'll allow you to do it, but you could theoretically move it over there and put Linux there. If you can't do it for some reason, it'll give you an error. So if we come down here, we can see 28 gigabytes or 28,000 megabytes is about how much space it's actually using at the moment. So we'll just drag that out to around 40 odd. So we've got a little bit of white space there, or free space on the C drive, and we'll hit resize move. There is no changes have actually been done, but it's giving us a graphical representation of what it's going to look like when it's finished. Now we could put Linux here, or we could put Linux up the end, or we could give Linux all of this space. But what we're going to do is we're going to put Linux up the end here somewhere on about 40 gigabytes. I'm going to use the rest of the space as an NTFS partition so that Windows and Linux can both use it. And this is obviously more for Windows advantage than Linux, because Linux can read the Windows file system, but Windows cannot read the Linux file system. Now there's already three primary partitions on there at the moment, and we can only have 4 primary partitions on a system such as this unless you're using GPT, but that's another thing. So if we click in here, you can see as I click, the selection down the bottom sort of follows the top. They're related to each other. For example, if I was to add another partition in here now, so we'll go partition new, and we'll make it about 40, and we can see it says there primary extension 4, so we could put Linux on that. So let's add that. And there's Linux, there's Windows, well that's where we're going to put Linux, and we've got 117 gigabytes left here, but we can't actually get to that now. So if we go partition new, we get an error. So it's not possible to create more than 4 primary partitions. Okay, so we'll say OK, and we'll just hit the undo button. So back to here, we have to put an extended partition in here. So we'll go partition new, and instead of create as a primary partition, I'm going to click there and hit extended partition, and that's about all we need to worry about there. We'll hit add. Now we can add other partitions or logical partitions within that extended partition. So we'll go partition new. I know it seems a bit confusing, but that's just the way it is. So we'll come down here until we leave. So this is free space following, so this will be up the end. So there we go, there's 47, that'll do for our demo, and it'll give us about 114 for the shared space. And now we'll select file system is going to be NTFS, or you could use FAT or anything else Windows could read. So there's your FAT. You could use FAT32, but I'd recommend NTFS. Okay, so we can now add that, and we can call that, for example, data, give it a label. We'll add that, and there we can see it's got its label data. There it is there. Now up here we can put our Linux system. Again, we click on it, partition, new, and we can just add that. It's extension 4, but we're going to change all that later in the installer. So now we've got Windows on 40 gigabytes here. We've got an NTFS partition in the middle of 100 odd gigabytes, and this is where we're going to put our Linux system up the end on this 46 gigabyte partition. And once again, the very far left and far right, we have the other two Windows created systems there that don't really concern us at this point. So we're going to now hit the check mark, and that'll write the changes to disk. So at this point, we could actually just close out of here, not make any changes, shut the computer down and reboot into Windows. Nothing's actually happened at this point. Once we hit this little check mark, it's going to say, "Are you sure?" And I'm going to go apply. And this might take a little while, so we'll let it do its thing there. Depending on the speed of your computer and how much changes you've made here, it might take 5 or 10 minutes, it might take half an hour, so just let it do its thing, and we'll pick it back up at the finish. All operations successfully completed, so we can close out of there. It's going to refresh itself. That probably took about 10 minutes. And just to reiterate, if this was a system that I was going to be using as my daily driver, I certainly wouldn't have given Windows only 10 gigabytes or so of free space. I would have left a lot more for it than that. And I would like to see Linux on a little bit larger than that, although it will work on 30 or 40 gigabytes. Again, it's going to slowly start chewing up a little bit of space over time as well, but this is just purely as a demonstration. And the other thing is, traditionally Linux has allocated usually about the size of your RAM. So if you've got 4 gigabytes of RAM, Linux has usually put a 4 gigabyte swap partition at the end. But Linux, in this case Linux Mint, uses a swap file now on its main partition, on its system partition. So unless you manually give it a swap partition, it'll just use that swap file, and that means you don't have to make another partition for that. And while we're here, this is where our Linux is going to be installed. We just want to make a note. It's /dev/SDA6. So dev is device, and SDA6 is the partition name or the partition number. We can see we've named the other one, we've given it the title data, the label. So SDA6 down here is where we're going to put it, /dev/SDA6. So write that down, or remember that it's SDA6 for when we get to the appropriate section on the installer. So that should work now. We'll close out of there. We can start the installer. We'll work our way through, and that's your language, that's your keyboard, so that's good for me, so we'll just continue. And as I normally select this, I recommend you do as well, to avoid issues with everyday things. And here we are back again. The installer's detected that the computer's got Windows 10 on it, and it's asking us what we want to do. We can install alongside Windows 10, which we went through all this before. So now we're going to choose something else because we've set up our partitions. So we'll select something else and we'll continue. You can do some basic partitioning from here, but you really need to open up that gparted that we used earlier. This is the part where we get to make the choices manually. Obviously we've already done all our partitioning, so we should find SDA6, and there it is. You'll remember from the G-part partition editor we made a note that it was partition SDA6, and we can see it's also extension 4. There's no reference to the label that we called the data partition, which is there, SDA5. So we'll click on SDA6 and we'll click change. Do not use the partition, so we're going to change that into extension 4 journaling file system. We'll format it, and the mount point is just this /. So that's sort of like Linux's version of C drive, is just a plain /. And we're going to go OK. Date, you can see the check marks turned up in there for the format. There's no check marks in the others because we certainly don't want to format any of the other partitions at this stage. Even SDA5, because we chose NTFS as its file system for the shared partition, or partition we're going to use to swap files between the two systems, it's already formatted as NTFS, so we don't need to worry about that. And again, we don't need to worry about a swap partition because Linux will use a swap file within its system. So that's all we need to worry about there. The bootloader is going to go onto SDA, which we can see here. That's the top, so that's the root of the actual drive. And that's all we need to be bothered with there, so we can hit install now. And we're going to get a warning here. We'll continue. We'll select our location. You can type into there. So if I start typing Melbourne, it's going to let me select. You can also click on the map if you know roughly where you are. So I can click here, Melbourne's about there. We'll continue. We'll give ourselves a name. Give the computer a name. And a password. You could log in automatically, I don't recommend it. And you can encrypt your home folder if you want, so you make your own choices there. And then we hit continue. And hopefully in about 5 or 10 minutes that'll be finished. And then we can boot between the two systems. So we'll come back when it's done. The installation's now complete. There's no point hanging around, so we'll hit restart. And we'll go into the two systems and have a look. And here's our new boot menu. At the top is Linux Mint, and at the bottom is Windows 10. And there is a timer. As soon as you hit the up and down arrows on your keyboard, the timer stops. The timer lasts for 10 seconds. So we'll go back up to Linux Mint and press enter. The Linux Mint login screen, so I'll put in the password. And here we are up to the desktop of our fresh Linux Mint installed. We get the welcome screen. Close that, we don't need to see that again. You can see there's no install Linux Mint icon over here now, so that's one way of knowing that you're onto the actual system proper. If we start the file manager, and we'll just this out. So this is our system. We're currently in home, which is our username, and there's our documents and video folders and music and so forth. And this is the file system here. So that's like the C drive for Windows, but it's just the / Linux. And there's our home folder, and there's our username. Now we're back to where we were before. Down here, there's the data drive. This one here will be Windows. It's just called 43 GB volume. So if we click there, we should see all the Windows folders. And there they are. And if we go into documents and settings, into my username, and I think in downloads I've got some stuff in there, so we could actually create a folder there, and I'll just call it ZZZ, like so. So when we go back into Windows in a moment, if we have a look, we should find that folder in there. And as I say, if we were in Windows now, we couldn't do that back into Linux. So this is a one-way street here. I can delete stuff from there as well. So if we go into data, it should be empty. We'll create a new folder here, and we'll call it -Linux, iLinux, like so. And if we start the disk utility, we can see this looks similar to what it looked like in Windows. So there's the system partition there. That's the recovery partition for Windows. This is Windows. This is the 120 gigabyte partition that we're going to use to swap data backwards and forwards. And this is our Linux system over here. And above you can just see that's the extended partition with these two other partitions that we created before installing. And it's just giving a different graphical representation of how it all looks. So we'll close out of there. Close out of there. We'll go into Windows. You can see the timer down the very bottom there, 8, 7, 6, etc. So we'll just come down to Windows and press enter. You may get a disk error. Windows wants to check the disk because you've resized its drive. If you get that, obviously just let it do it. It'll probably only do it the once. We'll open up the Windows File Explorer. You can see we've got a data drive. I'll have a look. It should have iLinux in there, and it does. So we can right click, we can new folder in here, and we'll go Hi Windows. So, and if we go into our downloads, we should see that ZZZ folder. There it is there. And we right click the menu, go to disk management. And here's our disk 0. So once again, there's the system reserve, 500 megs. And at the other end, there's that recovery partition. And before, the C drive was using all of this space in between. And now you can see Windows, the C drive's 40 gigs. There's our data drive, which is 100 and something gigabytes. And this one here is Linux. But Windows can just see that it's a healthy partition. That's all it knows. It can't actually read any of the files in there. And it doesn't even show up in the Windows File Explorer because it simply can't read it. So there you go. There's Linux and Windows in dual boot mode with a separate partition to swap files backwards and forwards between them. Both systems working, both booting and working okay. Obviously, this is not a perfect scenario, having to move files backwards and forwards like that, but whether you're getting onto two separate physical computers or dual booting on the one machine, that's pretty much the same thing. You're on a different system, so there has to be some way of getting files from one to the other if that's what you want to do. And this is just a solution to that issue. There's lots of other ways you could do this, but this is a fairly straightforward way for somebody that's wanting to try Linux and still keep their Windows and be able to, sort of work between the two systems a little bit. So there's some food for thought for you.